Hey everybody, so I'm here to answer some of the questions that were left unanswered in our webinar. So the first one from Kara, who asks if Twine can export files that can be used in an LMS. Twine exports as an HTML, which means that you could use it wherever you could use a web page. If you want to use it in LMS in a SCORM compliant sort of format, what I would suggest is you download it as an HTML, and tools like Storyline have insert web object option, right? And the web object, this is not something that a lot of people know or aware of. Web object doesn't have to be something on the internet. It could be an HTML file on your local system. So you have your Twine export sitting there. You go to your Storyline and you say insert web object, find the location of your Twine export, and it will work beautifully. So that is sort of a workaround on how to use Twine in an LMS. If you could simply upload the HTML5 file in LMS, then that would work too. Okay. Let's go to the second question. This is from Michaela, who's asking, okay, so whether the end learners don't know what role or level they are, or at least the stakeholders think so. And so how could you advocate experience-based learning pathways? So this is a really interesting question. And I would just take a step back and I would say, why do stakeholders think that end learners are not able to self-assess themselves correctly? Maybe there is a reason to that opinion, yeah? Sometimes it's a really simple determination, which we can leave to the end users. So we were creating this course for a real estate association, and all the realtors have to do when they come into the course is to say, okay, are they a commercial real estate agent or personal? And that is something that they can easily determine. So we leave it to them. But at other times, self-assessment can be tricky, because people who are bad at self-assessment cannot self-assess that they are bad at self-assessment. Anyways, my strategy for that is to scaffold that experience, scaffold that determination. For example, instead of asking, are you novice or experienced? You say how many years of experience you have, right? And that is more easily determinable, that is more quantifiable. And then based on that years of experience, or how frequently do you use this software, or what is your job role, you can, based on that, then decide the learning pathways. Another option is that you have your learners test into a level. So you start with a few questions. If you get them correctly, you are in this pathway. If you don't get them correctly, then you are in that pathway. So all of those are good ideas, depending on what you're looking for. Okay, next question from Nathan Sule. Any advice on building brand scenarios that are easily maintained? And oh my God, I feel your pain, because inheriting a branched module from somebody and fixing it is and can be a terrible, terrible nightmare. We sometimes go back to our own work that we built years ago, and then we're like, okay, what was I thinking, right? And that is something that we've built ourselves. So, and especially if, you're moving a project from one developer to another developer, the ID has left or whatever, it can be a mess. So there are some good practices to make your work future safe for yourself, for the sake of the next person who's going to inherit it. And one biggest thing is good nomenclature. And we talked about this a little bit in our webinar as well. But absolutely, good nomenclature, good documentation is critical in any work, but especially in branching scenarios, because you wouldn't know if this variable changes state, what happens, right? It's not necessarily apparent unless you have, go in and deep dive into triggers. And there are so many different ways of, things can happen that you never always are sure. So name your variables, name your layers, name your slides, name your scenes intentionally. Don't use the default. Many people don't use multiple scenes, and most of their even big files are one single scene. Using multiple scenes is a great way to segment your development, right? So, you have 3 different studies, 3 different scenarios, 3 different situations, put them in different scenes so it becomes clear what's happening where and how things are moving along. Another thing that we do as a practice is we leave notes and documentation, not only in the storyboard, but also in the final file itself. We put it in a text box and we keep the text box off the canvas. So in the published format, you cannot see it, but any developer can then go and read those notes. They are equivalent to comments being put in a code, right? And then any developer can understand the logic. So that is another good idea to do. Okay. So Wanda is asking, how does the e-learning know what content was missed? And I'm assuming that this is for our example for the healthcare scenario where learners could pick any 2 out of the 4 examples. And then later, we would give them the missed content. What we're doing in this case is, see, there are these 4 cases. So we say there is a variable case 1, case 2, case 3, case 4. They might be true and false variables. So if you click on case 1, that variable becomes true. If you click on case 3, that variable becomes true. And then as you finish, I'm saying, okay, what is the value of these variables? If case 2 is false, show this slide. If case 4 is false, then show this slide. And that is how we're keeping a track of what was missed and what was not. Okay, and then another case study specific question from Tal. What is the thought behind presenting that learning later versus in the moment? This is a good question, and I wish I had more time to talk about it. But there is, and I'm assuming it is for this particular case study where we're simulating a real life scenario, we're simulating an audit process. And sometimes when learner makes a mistake, we don't immediately tell them that you've made a mistake. And down the road, they find out that, oh, I made a mistake there. I have to now go back and fix it or whatever. And the logic with that is there is an interesting value in delayed consequence, in that sometimes in life, that is exactly what happens. A very good example from the same module is when the learner goes to interview the client, the CEO, and the CEO does not have sufficient time to answer all their 3 questions. So the learner has to pick only 2 questions. Whether they choose the right 2 questions or the wrong 2 questions, they get 0 feedback. The CEO answers their questions, they come back to their work, and they continue down the module. Later in the module, if they haven't asked the right questions, they will not have sufficient information. They will again have to go back to the CEO, make a phone call. The CEO will be upset and they'll say, why are you calling me again? We already discussed this. And so we've built in the delayed feedback. And the beauty of that is exactly what happens in real life. You would not know in an interview whether you asked all the right questions unless, now down the road, you're doing your calculations and you figure out you don't have all the information. So that is the value. Is basically recreating real life. Okay, then I have a couple of questions next on the AI-enabled e-learning that I showed you guys. Using AI to build branching and scenarios. Will course be still accessible while using ChatGPT? Is a question from Roby. And absolutely yes. The course does not know where the content is coming from. So it is that is invisible to the course, right? Now, what we do is it's a text box, and the value of the text box, the content of the text box is coming from ChatGPT. You can always put an alt text to that text box. So whether you're using screen reader, whether you're using alt text, it will still be absolutely accessible. You could predetermine the color contrast of the text box. So there is nothing really different about building an accessible course with or without ChatGPT integration. And then, can you use ChatGPT in RISE 360 today? Unfortunately not, because there are no triggers in RISE 360. What you could do is build it in a storyline module and then use that storyline block to bring your integration into RISE. Okay, so that were all the questions I had that did not get answered. If there is anything else left, feel free to write to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I hope I was able to answer all the questions. Take care. Bye-bye.